Now, I've got some nice things to say about the National Development Commission. Is there anybody here from the National Development Commission? Oh, that's a shame, because they're actually doing a really good job, in as much as they have a multidimensional approach to trying to deal with population aging, and that's a very good thing, yeah? In terms of raising labour productivity, in terms of making society friendlier, and all of these other different issues. So they're actually doing a really great job in looking at this and considering this in a holistic way, in a multidisciplinary way. But at the same time, they can't resist encouraging people to have more children, yeah? When we try to look at a demographic solution to a demographic problem, it's not going to work, okay? It's unlikely to work. We have to think multidimensionally, and then we can solve a lot of these different issues relating to labour productivity and related to aging and stagnation and so on. And I think that this toxic narrative of blaming people and of selfishness is profoundly unhelpful. So then, should we just forget about fertility? Let's just reform the pension system. Let's just improve productivity. Well, not so fast, okay? I wouldn't say that. Because the first reason, of course, is that if fertility was a little bit higher, then it would change the dynamics, because everything is changed very, very quickly, right? And it might make reform a little bit easier. But actually, what I want to argue is that one of the reasons why we should focus back on fertility is not just to increase the fertility rate for its own sake, but it's because people would like to have more children than they have. All of the surveys suggest that we know, that we've used recently, suggest that people would like to have more children than they end up having. Yeah? Very few people say, at age 18 or 19 or 20, I only want to have one child. Right? A lot of people say they want to have 2 children. People want to get into relationships, whether it's in marriage or other long-term cohabiting relationships. And people want to balance work and family. Of course, this is a stupid picture because it's got a picture of a man. For men, it's very easy to balance work and family because you just work, right? But and this is under the current scenario, right? But if you put a woman there, it becomes much more difficult. So how have we got from this situation where people want to get married, they want to have children, they want to balance work and family, but they're not getting married, right? Where fertility is very low, where we see that although people say, I want to have 2 children, by the time they have one, most say, I'm done, I don't want to have any more, right? Or half the people say, I'm done, I don't want to have any more children. So this, I would say, I think this is the real population problem, yeah? So the old view was to say, okay, low fertility is bad. Low fertility leads to aging and stagnation. So we've got to fix low fertility. And it's not really worked very well. I would argue that actually the real problem is that people don't feel they're able to do what they would like to do. They can't meet their own aspirations. So the gap between what people would like to do and what people feel they're able to do, I think that's where the problem is. And that's where we should focus on. And so it's not that that's the problem itself, but it's more that this is the consequence of other problems, yeah, of other issues in society. And let me just talk a little bit about what that means. This is the kind of weird part in the talk where me, as an English man, explains to Taiwanese women why they're not having children. This is ridiculous, all right? But anyway, but there's a kind of, but this is similar issues all around the world, right? So it's not just particular to Taiwan, right? So of course, we think about the direct costs and the indirect costs of having children, yeah? So the direct costs in terms of the cost of education, childcare, consumption, buying stuff, just buying stuff for children. But then we also think about the indirect costs, yeah, or the opportunity costs. So if your career is going very well, your earnings are going up, and all of a sudden you have your child, and then it just stops, and then you kind of go along, and then maybe then you go back to work, and then maybe have another child, and it stops, and actually more likely you'll leave the labour market, right? So that gap between, it's very difficult doing imaginary graphs back to front, I'm sorry, but so the gap between that trajectory and, quite frankly, a man's trajectory is what we would think of as the opportunity cost. And of course, to make matters even worse, even if you didn't have children, woman's salary will be lower than a man's salary anyway. But that's just sexism that we have to live with, apparently, in different parts of the world. Okay, so we have these direct costs and these indirect costs. And of course, the policies that have been implemented so far tend to focus on financial transfers, right? Of just trying to cut these direct costs. Yeah, but there's other issues as well that we need to focus on. Because these days, it's there's many barriers to entry in terms of starting a family, right? In different, not just in Taiwan, but in all different parts of the world. The job that I have, okay, I have a job until I retire. It's kind of difficult for me to get fired. I've got a pension, yeah? I've got annual leave, I've got everything. I've got an old-fashioned job, yeah? Those jobs are pretty rare these days. Graduate jobs have changed. The job market, we call the dualization of the job market, of the labor market, where you've got lucky people like me and civil servants, for example, some people who work in big corporations, and then a more fragile, precarious work as well. Well, if you're risk averse, that's going to be very difficult, right? That's very problematic for you to make big, major life decisions about the cost of property. It's nice when you start a family to start off in your own new house or your own flat. Well, if you can never afford to buy a flat or even afford the deposit on a flat or the rent for a flat, that's very difficult. It's very difficult to get started. The costs of marriage, just even the physical cost, the actual out-of-pocket expenses of getting married, right? It's not cheap. But then we think about work culture, dating culture, family expectations, gender roles. All these different things are crucially important to understanding why there is this gap between aspiration and reality. Yeah, and of course, not all of these things can be dealt with by the government. Yeah, although in Singapore they tried to get involved in dating culture with mixed results. Let's just say that. Okay. But it's a very, very multidimensional issue. And of course, each person will have their own configurations. It'll be different for everybody. You talk to 100 people about why they didn't have a second child when they wanted to. They will give you 100 different reasons. Yeah? Some people would say it's about their job. Some people would say that it's about their partner. Some people would say it's about their mother-in-law. All kinds of different reasons. Yeah? And of course, we have to be honest about the fact that we live in an age where we might believe we have gender equality, but we do not have gender equality. Now, there is a biological inequality that men can't have children. I know that Arnold Schwarzenegger did in Danny DeVito in the film Junior some years ago, but that was a kind of an outlier, and it wasn't real. So women are the ones who have children. But society, rather than compensating for that, tends towards penalizing women for this biological obligation, if you will. And so one thing which has contributed to this is this hard link between marriage and childbearing. A big difference between between Europe and East Asia is that the link between marriage and childbearing is pretty weak. Right? So in Europe, in many countries, the majority of first births actually occur outside of marriage. Now, there's two ways you can look at this. You go, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the breakdown of family and so forth. But actually, people are quite happy about this. They don't, and because what it means is that people try out relationships. You can try, you move in with somebody, you cohabit with somebody, and if it doesn't work out, well, you just move on. You go to somebody else. You try different things. But of course, if your first step is marriage, that's a different thing entirely. Right? So there's this hard link between marriage and childbearing. Of course, things are changing. And of course, you don't need me to say that just in the last week, different movements, different changes in attitudes towards the family and towards unions have changed here in Taiwan. Yeah, first in Asia. And so it's I think it's a matter of when rather than if these changes are going to be rolled out in different parts of the world. Having said that, of course, like the day after in Taiwan, we had the first same-sex union. In Hong Kong, we had a problem because there was an advert with two men holding hands at the airport, and the MTR and the airport authority said, get it off, we don't like it. So we've still got a long way to go in terms of these attitudes about changing family systems. And also, we need to be realistic about women's public and private sphere roles. Taiwan, the top ranked in Asia for gender equality, one of the top ranked in the world for gender equality. But that's just because there's a lot of female MPs, right? It's not about because of gender roles. It's not because, I'm very sorry to say this, it's not because Taiwanese men spend all their time ironing and cooking and cleaning at home, because that's not the case, right? This is about public sphere roles and not about private sphere roles. Yeah, and so, in fact, here, the Time Use Survey, that's not just me saying this, from 2004, Taiwanese women spent on average 15.6 hours a week on domestic work and childcare. Taiwanese men, 2.2 hours a week. If it makes you feel better, it's much lower in Japan. So Taiwanese men still do more work at home than Japanese men. So we still have this incomplete social revolution. And this is a project that we finished a few years ago when we did some qualitative interviews in Taiwan with couples with one child or two children. And I don't know whether or not these may seem familiar, but I'll read a few of these out. So this is a woman with one child. She said, I wish when he comes back from work, I like him for it to be happy and playing with the kids. Then he plays a kind father role. But usually when he comes back, he's worn out and just wants to watch TV. Something like that. And then I look at him and I feel of course, I feel, wow, I've been caring for my child for a whole day. It's so tough. Why do you look so tired when you come back home from work? Here's another example here. If he's the person who is very actively involved in children, I would be looking forward to having another baby, right? So this somebody who would have another child, okay? What does she say? But he's not. Sometimes he's at home with the child rather than the office, but he does his own business, surfing with his mobile phone. The child is left alone. He doesn't play with him, interact with him. So I feel the child is just my responsibility. I've got to take care of him, keep him with me. I just say, forget about it. I don't want to have a child now. Really, I don't want to, because I feel the pressure is all on me, and so on and so forth, right? This is just one particular story. Now, this is important because, of course, we think about, well, what can the government do about this, right? What can the government do to stop poor Hui Chun's husband messing about on his bloody mobile phone all night and look and be a bit more active? The government can't do anything about that. It's very difficult for the government to do anything about that. But this, for her, is a primary reason why she doesn't want to have a second child. Yeah. So just making her feel guilty about not having a second child is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And also, we can be careful that sometimes policies can have the influence that we don't expect. So in Spain, also a place with very low fertility rates, not known for particularly high rates of gender equality in the home as well, they introduced a new big policy where all men could be entitled to paternity leave. Right? And this was actually to try to encourage people to have more children. So men who stay at home with their wives, partners, and look after their children. And a lot of men took this up, and then a few years later they did some follow-up research, and they found that among the men who wanted to stay at home, who stayed at home to look after their children, they wanted to have fewer children because they realized that staying at home and looking after your children is bloody hard work. And so the idea that they would have to do it again and again for a third time, oh, no, I'm done now. So this is where a policy should be a pro-gender equity policy that we would all support. Yeah, that's brilliant. Get men more involved in childbearing and child rearing. And, this would be a great thing. And, of course, it's actually backfired. Because the core issue, the core problem of gender roles at home wasn't addressed. Yeah, it was just a policy implementation from above. So when you look at it in this way, that's why I think we could safely say that there's infinite pathways, there's infinite reasons why different people say they want to do different things. And of course, this shouldn't surprise us. One of the big problems with any kind of demographic or any quantitative analysis is that we're always looking for general relationships. Got it? Yeah, we're always looking for general relationships. The reality is, of all the billions of people on this earth, we are all kind of different. I'm not going to get emotional about this, but we are. We all cherish certain things more than others. We value different things more than others. So of course, when we make decisions which demographers measure, or that policymakers want to deal with, that policymakers want to manipulate, of course, everybody will be different. Whether it's about wanting to move, or wanting to have a pension, or wanting to have children, or wanting to get married, or whatever it is. So we have to be mindful of that. And of course, it will operate at different levels. Yeah, you may have something inside of you, your own particular belief, that will all be different. Yeah, but then there'll also be other issues, other policies, other situations which will affect and apply to different people in different ways. Yeah, so that's why it becomes very difficult.